Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PVPodcast. I'm your host, Cyclohexanol, and today we're going to be talking about Triglavian ships. Those new ships that are coming out, they have some interesting attributes, and we're going to talk about them and talk about what we can do with them and what we plan on doing with them. Today we're joined by Blood Ruin, Beatron, and MJ11JM. Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your experience in EVE, and then your experience with the Trig ships so far. Would you like to start, Blood?
So my name is Blood Ruin. I've done various YouTube videos and just small gang activities. My YouTube channel is the Blood Raid and used to stream a while back. My experience in EVE is very kind of focused around small gang and solo PvP. Spent about 2 years in faction warfare, so I'm very familiar with the frigate afterburner meta that's going on in faction warfare areas. And then more recently, been involved in some tournament play like Even T. I'm on Diametrically Opposed, which we're now our majors team, and I've been involved with thermodynamics for the AT last year and then this year again. So a little bit of experience there. The Trig ship's just been playing around on CC. I don't think I've really have jumped in as wholeheartedly as some people, but definitely been playing around with some of the fits and modules and tweaks and having fun there.
Very cool. Beatron?
Yeah, so my name is Beatron. I'm a member of Integritas Corporation. We're small gangers, soloers. I'm also involved with the thermodynamics AT team. Sorry for the random key up there. I was pointing something. Yeah, my experience through EVE has lasted since about 2010. The whole time been involved with small gang and solo. A little bit of large fleet combat in my past, but beyond that, not much.
Awesome. MJ?
I'm MJ11JM, or in game as Demonic Moo. Been playing since about 2013. Started off with, in high-sec Care Bear, but recently, through Cyclo's kind of pushing, I've started in with like AT stuff. I've done a lot of small game recently, and I'm just kind of getting back into the field of PvP. Been doing it for 6 months now.
Very cool. And talking about the AT, speaking of which, our main news item for today, our only news item, the round table for the Alliance tournament has been released. The video of it, and on Reddit, you can also find a notes version. And a couple of takeaways from this that kind of tie in with what we're going to be talking about today is Trig ships are going to be allowed in the AT, and you can use mutated modules on flagships. At least that's what they say is likely going to happen. What do you guys think about that?
Go ahead, Blood. Go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say I think AT is one of those areas where people tend to spreadsheet really hard. And like if you're coming up against a flag Balgorn, you start making some very specific assumptions, even down to within 1 kilometer, what the range is of a Toby web with links and all kinds of things like that. And I think mutated mods are going to make that much more difficult. Maybe that's going to be a good thing. We'll see. Maybe more AT ships will die because they're not, it's harder to account for how much nuke pressure or like web range or whatever the instance may be of those mutated mods. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting.
I think the mutated mods are going to have a marginal effect on AT flagship meta. It's probably just going to be pushing people further towards existing metas, but just going to open it up, maybe be a little more available. Everybody will have access to something much closer to a Toby web than the limited few who can actually afford one. As far as like tank mods and stuff, I'm not sure exactly what they're going to allow. I'd be interested to see. I don't know if they really thought that completely through yet. Fully like perfect roll mutated Pith X type shield booster on a flag Scorp or Scorp Navy or something would be really potentially broken. But I'm excited about that they're going to allow the new ships. I think they should allow the new ships. As far as their stats go, they're not exceptionally tanky, and any scary situation of them like spider repping, spider tanking and stuff is gonna not be viable. Obviously, remote reps are banned on anything but your Logi. The large amount of high slots make for some interesting potential out of maybe Tinker comps again. High projection, high tracking would again help Tinker comps, but I don't know. I just think they're going to be an interesting shake-up to the existing meta.
Very cool. I could definitely see Balgorns becoming even more of a problem with the mutated mods easily, considering what their web ranges could be before and comps that, like battlecruiser comps that actually anchor around those. Not literally, but they're anchored by it in the webs and the assistance in the application.
Yeah, but that's the thing is the previous flagship Geddons they were using a Toby web, which is base 20. With heat, they get a 25 web. They put it on the Balgorn. They get out to like 60 plus links. They're pushing 70 plus. A fully mutated best range, like a Dark Blood web, which has the best base range, will still fall short of the Toby web. So I think you're not going to see that cap go any further. You're just going to see more teams potentially having access to something almost as strong.
Do you think that anyone would mutate a Toby web? I mean, they're
You
hard.
can't mutate a Toby web.
Oh, really? What?
Yeah, officer mods are of a different
okay.
type. Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought it was
All
just
the
people wouldn't because they were so hard to get.
no, yeah, you actually can't put it into the
Okay.
mutation. And then
You can put officer mods on them.
Yeah, officer mods or officer, because like the Toby web is a different type. Or am I thinking? I might be thinking of the scramblers because I know those got changed to heavy scramblers and stuff.
Yeah,
in the
you're
last
using in the
five.
scrims, but you can definitely mutate the Toby webs.
All right.
Now, whether or not someone's going to risk bricking a 30, or like 15 billion ISK mod, I don't know, but like
We're worth quite a bit more than that when it comes to AT season.
Like
but yeah,
during
I don't know if
AT.
anybody would risk that.
But like, yeah, off season it's like 15, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I guess I guess I was wrong about that. Yeah, I was just thinking about scramblers and disruptors because they're a different actual item class. Yeah, that's
It'll be. The other thing is like with the ships actually being used. I think it really depends on point value because they're a separate class, right? They're not considered faction frigates or faction cruisers. They're actually precursor items or precursor ships. They're in their own class, so you could give them a different point value, and I think that's really gonna determine how much they get used. Because like the frigate, it's like a Punisher, but it's a Punisher that could potentially put out 400 DPS. So it's depending on the point value, but it's like maybe less tanky than an assault frigate. So it'll be interesting points wise to see how they balance it and where they put these ships. I think that will really determine their use. So
yeah, I'd agree completely. If they balance them at similar points to pirate cruisers, I'd expect to see them used. Their potential damage output on all their classes is exceptionally high.
yeah.
But ramping, I don't know. People have to spreadsheet the fuck out of them and see what's good, what's bad.
Yeah. And currently, with the fact that they don't actually consume any ammo on Singularity, I don't know if that's something they're going to be changing.
Yeah, that's
But-
something really weird. When I first, because like max you can load is 100 of them into one gun, but 100 of any of those bottles is huge. Like you can, if
Yeah,
you're trying to carry.
each one is 1 cubic meter.
Yeah,
and
it's
so-
insane. So I don't know what they're gonna do with that. I assume that's just straight up broken. I hope they
Just
don't
like
intend.
placeholder values.
Yeah, I hope they don't keep them at their same size, or they reduce how many you actually need to load into the gun or something. Because like, if you're trying to carry Mythic, Occult, and like Gluon or something in your cruiser, you get 6 cap boosters. So enjoy.
Did try putting them in your frigate.
Yeah, exactly.
Frigate only
yeah,
has
yeah.
130 cargo. So.
Can have like
130
one
in 3.
full clip and then 30 more.
Yeah, I guess, but I don't know how they're going to use them. I would hope they wouldn't be 1 per cycle, right? Like it takes, what is it? I think it's like 17 cycles to get up to full damage, 18 cycles to get up to full damage. So that would suck.
I'm hoping it's just placeholder values, and I'm kind of hoping they function somewhat like lasers in how they reload and things, because I think that will be beneficial. Maybe not like perfectly like them, but I think there's a lot of similarities when you look at like their ranges and things for the modules to say like pulse lasers.
I think that's definitely like a baseline for the ranges on what are the disintegrators, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that their plan is really to turn it into like a crystal situation, though, because if that was the plan, then we would see it being a little bit different. I don't think we would see 100 rounds being able to go into a clip, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
But
they definitely have work to do there on that. It's really weird right now.
But I think switching ammo types is like really important in this, like because of the short fall off, or no fall off, really, like like the very short fall off, and then it just essentially turns off. I think being able to switch quickly is imperative, similar with how lasers are used.
And making the decision of whether to switch or not, because you do have that damage ramp up.
Exactly.
Is it easier to stay in that range and get damage, or do you want to maybe get closer and load higher damage?
Or load lower damage, longer range, so that you can get a full ramp up,
Right.
Maybe we should back it up and just quickly look at all three of the precursor ships.
Yeah, let's start with the Demovic. And the things that, when I fit one of these, the things that really stuck out to me is the fact that it's long range ammo without any tracking enhancers, gets you out to 16 kilometers, and the fact that it only has 2 mid slots. That seemed, both those little points seemed very weak to me.
I would agree, man. I think the frigate is going to be the most out of place. With only 2 mid slots and limited range, they're clearly more geared towards brawling and cap pressure, with their bonuses to cap reduced cycles on their outgoing newts and nosses. And with only 2 mid slots, what are you going to do? You get a afterburner and a point, afterburner and a web, cap booster and a web, cap booster and a point. Perhaps you won't need the webs, as all 3 of the ships get that tracking bonus, as well as extremely high base tracking. But it's very confusing. I don't know how to make that fit into the meta particularly well. Maybe it'll just be a great brawler, as it can project out past scram range. In faction warfare space, it might work really well fighting on beacons. Just going with a cap booster and a long point or something. I don't think
it would work well fighting in fact we're on beacons, simply because it doesn't have any range control. And your close range ammo, the high damage one, has a range of like 6 to 7 kilometers. And if you get scram kited by any T1 frigate, you're just kind of boned there.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the frigate very much. I've been screwing around with the cruiser a lot on CC. But I heard the frigate can potentially do like 400 DPS with close range. But I don't know what its longer ranges are. But if it with 3 high slots, it could win the Newt War and the Cap War very quickly, and keep something capped and prevent it from burning out of range.
I was looking at it potentially like a slicer, but it has the potential to field drones, right? So the only problem is that it has, with one tracking enhancer, you can head out to 20k with long range ammo. If like currently there's no rigs for these weapons, so if it were to come with with rigs, I think then you could potentially really field this like a slicer that does an insane amount of DPS and has drones. Like at that point, you run into some issues potentially with fitting if you want to put like a newt on defensively or something. But I think it could very easily be converted towards like a slicer kind of kite meta and work pretty well.
I would hope that you can do that with it. I haven't screwed around with it, but
there's
some bad news on the rig side of things. So I had heard from apparently very unreliable sources that they were going to be putting in the gunnery rigs for the disintegrators. But when I told somebody about that, they asked CCP Rise directly, and he said that they did not have any plans to be putting those in.
At least not at the moment, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I still think they're like. So the other thing about it being in a slicer kind of meta is they're fast, dude. Just a MWD, a 5MN with no speed of any kind, like no nanofiber or polycarbons, it goes 3,300 cold. Like that's as fast as a slicer. So I could definitely see it being in that kind of meta if you solve the range issue.
Interesting. The whole line is fairly quick.
Yeah, the whole line is pretty quick. I think they'll be, if you solve the range issue, then I think it's just about how you want to fit it as far as tank and stuff, because the disintegrators just across the entire board take a ton of fitting, and then they're very capable of projecting and being decent at kite meta.
They take
Sorry,
up to, what, half of the fitting currently?
A
No matter
little
what
over.
ship it's gonna be either half or a little over half. So really, for the rest of the fitting, you're really gonna have to think about what you're doing with those ships and what you're trying to fit it for, because there's very little room on these things after the disintegrators.
Yeah, absolutely. I know on the cruiser, it is on power grid. It's almost exactly. It's just a little over half for power grid consumption. Actually, quite a bit over half. My fit currently has some current routers on it. It's like 790 gigajoule or megawatts to fit it, and you only have what's base. 1 sec. That's my actual ship. Never mind. 1 second.
So on the frigate, since we're talking about that, it has 62.5, and the disintegrator or the T2 takes 35.5. And one of the things I did is I kind of looked at that compared to like a rail comet, and the rail comet had like less overall power grid. Let's see, I'm pulling it up right now. But the railguns actually took up almost like exactly half, where the disintegrator takes up more than half, like 55% or something like that. And on a comet, it's like 2 150 railguns take let's see. Oh, that I can't read, but that's 50 power grid, and the railguns take up 30. So I don't know. I think it's actually on par for the frigate at least.
Well, but the
CPU is insane.
Yeah,
it
the
only has
CPU
like
is
30
nuts.
CPU left for the entire rest of the fit, which if you're talking about 30 CPU, like that's a web and a scram, like
Not even-
meta
a web
and
or a
scram.
scram.
Yeah, it's a T2 web or a T2 scram, or a meta if each one.
Yeah, you're very limited with these things. Yeah, no, I won't get off topic. I only know the cruiser exclusively.
Sorry, but I don't know. Like, it'll be interesting to see what people tweak with it. You could probably, the other thing with the frigate that I was looking at is, so on like cruisers and bigger ships, you really, if you're wanting power grid, one of the most efficient ways to do it is with like a current router, right? Because it's percentage based. Well, with the frigate, because you have such a small power grid pool to pull from, current routers tend to be less effective because they are percentage based. But if you use a micro aux power core, it'll give you just a straight amount of power grid. And on the frigate, that actually is like more than 20%. Pretty much, it's pretty high, and that can really open up some interesting doors. But it is, of course, sacrificing a low slot. So depending on what kind of setup you're going for. But you get 12 power grid when you have 62 total. That's a pretty good bonus, and I think that's more than you would get out of a current router rig. So like,
yeah, it's that's definitely the way to go. But you also have to consider that the micro auxiliary power core is going to be taking CPU away at the same time as well, right?
But you could go probably like overclocker in the rig maybe and mess with some stuff, and that gets kind of gimpy at some point. But
I think all three of the ships are going to push higher use. We're going to see much more Genelution pods for people wanting to use them. I know I've quickly adopted one for the cruiser. Back when the 100 MN meta really started to take hold, you saw a lot more of those popping out with people trying to deal with the higher fitting requirements. I think we'll see the same thing with these. Also, their base capacitor pool is pretty bad on almost all of them. It's frustrating. It seems like they tried to compensate. They tried to deal with the balance issues of having, at least on the cruiser and the battleship, a lot of slot options by limiting your overall pool and forcing you into some cap mods. But then compensating for that, like they give you all the utility highs, and obviously you're assuming you're going to use as many newts as you can get away with, but you don't have a very big pool to deal with it, so they give you reduced cap usage on the newts themselves. But then things just become very painful when trying to deal with like an active armor setup or an MWD. You're penalizing that pool horribly. Like versus a Vigilant compared to this Vedmak, or the cruiser at least. I know they made comparisons between these ships and Serpentis ships. You've got equal base speeds. You've got about, I think it was about 15% more base armor, but your capacitor pool is like 15% worse, which is worrisome on a ship that's going to be very cap hungry.
I can definitely see that. And speaking of the Vedmak, why don't we go ahead and dive into that ship? So when I was playing around with the Vedmak, I found that with Gluon, I got a nice 36 kilometer range without any tracking enhancers. And that was pretty swell. And it also goes 2,500 meters per second, or about that, with just the micro and with only one net. So it can haul pretty good. It can move pretty quickly, so I think it'll be a pretty decent kiting platform, and I'm sure there's more that you can do with it. What do you guys think about the Vedmak?
Before I spurg all over the potential anti-tackle platforms of the Vedmak, because I think that's going to be amazing. I think it's a great cruiser. It's teetering on the edge of too strong, probably held back mostly by its low initial DPS. I love its slot layout, the fact that you just gave you your 4 mids, plenty of low slots, and the weapon system itself is extremely strong. You've got a large drone base, 75 meters bandwidth, 50 megabit, or 75 meters cubed, 50 megabit bandwidth. It's very strong and very versatile. I've been playing with Fitz a lot. You can do some fairly legitimate dual rep close range setups, as well as longer range dedicated kiting with tracking computers or whatever you want to get, and just push that range out as far as you can. The tracking on the guns is insane, like compared to other anti-tackle platforms or close range platforms. You've got tracking that's better than autocannons, slightly worse than blasters, but they're going to be beasts in almost all aspects. The close range damage with triple damage mod and full ramp, you're pushing 900 DPS out of your guns with heat. Which is nuts for a cruiser, although it does take a full minute to get you there. And the ship not having particularly strong tank makes me worried. I could see a lot of people putting themselves in situations where they are thinking of their damage a minute from now, not realizing that they can't tank their enemy's DPS for a minute. So I'm interested to see what other people are going to do with them, but I'm personally going to use the thing as a Omen Navy issue. That's just going to be extremely strong. It gets a web. You get multiple newts to deal with frigates if they get too close. You
get drones.
You got 3 flights of light drones, plenty of backups, and your tracking is double an Omen Navy issue. An Omen Navy issue with Scorch gets around a 36-ish tracking score. This thing gets, with my fit at least, a single tracking enhancer. I've got 71 tracking score. For comparison, a Retribution with standard gets around 110. So you're 3/4 of a Retribution's tracking with twice the range. They're going to be very strong.
Yeah, it seems silly because it gets that tracking bonus, but the disintegrators themselves have a very high innate tracking. So it's across all the classes. So the Vedmak having that tracking bonus is like crazy.
Yeah, it's going to be nuts. Like the thing I've settled on, if you put a single tracking enhancer, you can push that Gluon range out to a good 40 kilometers. The Omen Navy issue kind of being the benchmark for a long time for anti-tackle platforms, set that standard around. If you can't hit something at 40K, you're not You're not really as effective as you could be. You want to be minimum shooting that far. So this thing hits that point, and the tracking is just insane. You
Yeah,
only get a started 225 DPS, but a single, like, you tackle a interceptor with a frigate that does 225 DPS, you're killing them very,
well,
very quickly.
I was trying to think of other cruisers that get tracking bonuses, and the only one I can think of is a Stabber Fleet issue.
Phantasm.
Phantasm gets one as well. Okay, so like this is actually going to be very similar to a Phantasm in some regards as far as damage application and range.
Its tracking is far better than a Phantasm.
Really?
Even with
Okay.
the tracking bonus, I think the Phantasm, I think I said the number wrong. I think Omen Navy issue is like closer to a flat 30. The Phantasm is around 37, 38 with Scorch.
Jeez,
And
72, double that.
yeah, and the range doesn't even come close. Like, you want to throw all the locust rigs you can on your Phantasm, you're still
True.
not getting it out to 40 kilometers.
That's crazy.
Yeah, they're very interesting ships.
You also have a pretty interesting alpha strike there. If you're using the 2 gyros with, I think, with gluon, you're going to be doing about 750 damage, 800 damage for your alpha strike. And then, of course, that'll ramp up, but yeah, that could definitely be really good for anti-spy.
Yeah, it's nothing to shrug off, man. 225 DPS, though sounding initially low, is more than enough, considering you're going to be landing penetrating hits very frequently on interceptors. I mean, even if they're spiraling in on you, you're going to be hitting them hard the whole time. If they get too close, they get met with a web and 3 newts. It's going to be a little more reliant, I think, on pilots actually being able to intercept frigates they can't kill. Assault frigates are going to be the necessary evil to these things. You're not going to be able to break them particularly quickly, but you've got the utility to deal with them when they get in close. And something I do find interesting is you've got 4 mid slots, and some of the people I've been talking to have been suggesting potential shield fits to either maximize damage and range and speed. But man, they weren't kidding when they said they were pushing these things towards armor or HP. I referenced before the ratio from it to the Vigilant. This has over almost, I think it's like 900, just about 1,000 HP more than the Vigilant in its base armor, but it only has 1,000 shield hit points, and the Vigilant, I think, has 24.
But the Vigilant has a lot of whole HP. All the Serpentis ships do, right?
Yeah, overall, the Vigilant beats it on raw hit points. But like, you can get away. Like, a lot of people have done the Shield Vigilant, right? That's a pretty common
Yeah.
fit.
Yeah.
But it's just not. I don't think it's going to be viable at all in this thing. You only have 1,000 shield hit points. It's just not. Doesn't make any sense.
I did look and see if I could make a XLASB Vedmac work, and it's really tough on CPU. I think if you're running Genos, you could maybe make it work with like 1 or 2 fitting mods, but yeah, it's it's gonna be really hard to do an effective shield fit on the Vedmac for sure.
Yeah, and I think that'll be the whole ship line. I'm ignorant of the frigate for the most part, but I think that'll be.
I mean, the frigate, you only have 2 mids, so there's
obviously no
little
shield tank there.
Yeah,
but I mean,
yeah, very little.
Tank in general for these things is just not going to be a strong point. They have a fair amount of base.
I think
when we get to the battleship,
the way we look at tank generally, the strong point of these won't be the tank, but we're all pretty much small gangers who aren't used to remote reps. But we do have to remember that all 3 of these ships do get bonuses to remote repair capacitor need, 50% less cap need, and I believe range.
It's 100% bonus to range.
100% bonus to range and 50% reduction in cap need. So, and that's for the Vedmac. I'm wondering if we'll see. We've talked about the frigate and the cruiser so far. I'm wondering if we're going to see some remote rep gang with just like Vedmacs or the frigates roll around. What do you guys think about?
We could. That? So one thing that I didn't want to kind of bring up until the very end, but I think this is a good point, because we see a lot of remote rep Vexers and drone cores run around sometimes in like low sec and null, but they're very cheap, right? And I think remote rep a lot of times has a lot to do with your price point, and I'm very curious where these are going to fall as far as price, if they're going to be around that same cost as pirate variants of cruisers and battleships, or if they're going to be more or less. I think that's a lot of what's going to determine those kinds of setups, because if you're going to take out 5 or 6 of them and they're expensive, right? We don't see remote rep Orthruses, obviously, because they're not very effective. But okay, so maybe like Ashimus. We don't see like remote rep Ashimus. I think a lot because of like effectiveness, but also because of price point. And I think that will actually be a determining factor in kind of how people want to play them. And how willing people are to like commit to a fight. Because when you're in a remote rep gang, you're fully committed. It's up to the opponent to let you leave, right? So oftentimes you're far less mobile because you have to stay in rep range. And this will help a little bit, but your rep range still won't be amazing. I think with mediums, I think you'll get remote armor reps out to like 16 optimal instead of like 8 optimal.
Yeah, around there.
So it's still not like amazing, but it's better than it was.
For medium reps, if we're talking about the cruiser, you're getting optimal range within 21 kilometers, and the range is within 24 for T2 remote reps on these things.
That's actually pretty good. I mean,
and it might actually be higher. My Logi skills are kind of bad.
Nah, that won't affect your range on those. I'm pretty confident. Your Logi skills will only, like, your armor rep skills will only affect like capacitor use and things like that, and effectiveness, but not the actual range of the module. That's usually based off of the ship bonus. Yeah, so
that actually might not be a bad idea. You could, even when you're doing small gang kiting stuff, roll around with a rep or 2 on one of these things and just keep 1 or 2 newts on it, along with, of course, the disintegrator. And then you're kind of like ghetto Logi for your fleet.
I feel like that would get a little like very complicated very quickly, right? It's like when you have a Logi Legion or Logi Loki that also runs links and does probing and has guns on it. It's like when you start doing too much Swiss Army knife, it can get a little crazy. But I don't know. I'm sure there are some pilots out there that are more than capable of making it work. So
just think about all those times where your tackle has lag or a little bit of incompetence and ends up getting scrammed by something. It's like, yeah, don't worry, I got you.
And meanwhile, you're pumping out like 700 DPS of your own.
Oh,
I think I'm really excited about trying out some remote rep things, at least just for some lulls. Like, we used to have a guy in my corp, or we still have the guy, he just doesn't play very much right now, who always would fit remote reps on his utility high. It doesn't matter which ship he was flying. If it had a utility high and he couldn't put anything else on it, it was a remote rep. And it happened more than a couple times. I'm flying an interceptor, I'm dying, I can't leave the grid because I need to stay there to help. And he's like, it's okay, come fly up next to my Orthrus. And he would remote rep me from 6 kilometers in the middle of a fight with his friggin' Orthrus. So just making stuff like that easier and potentially more viable is really cool.
I do think on the battleship, we're going to see them being used a ton in wormholes for remote rep running sites and also PvP. But I think they're going to definitely kind of they might replace the Nestor use in like C5 space, but if they don't replace it, they'll at least provide another option or a counterpoint to them. So I think that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I think that's where we're going to see the most remote rep out of any of the ship lines will be in the battleship.
Yeah, I agree. As a potential small scale ship, I'm really excited to see their potential against small scale capital escalations on small gangs. Like all the time you're roaming, you come across a couple couple ships, you get into a good fight, and they bring in the single carrier, and it for the most part will shut you down unless you're comp specifically to deal with that. But if you can bring in just a few battleships with like 1600 DPS from range, that's enough to turn the tide in your favor. I mean, 3 of those things, it's enough DPS to kill that carrier.
Yeah, the DPS at full spool on one of those battleships is crazy. just the fact that it's putting out as much DPS as a Vindicator, but with farther range. Like,
Yeah, it's nuts. Well, and that's not even close range. Like, if you are going to gear these things for spider tanking up close in the carrier's face, just dealing with like an escalation force consisting of a Nestor, maybe a Logi Legion or something, and a couple of these Leshaks, you're up to 6,000-7,000 DPS fairly quickly out of just a few of them.
yeah, it's going to be pretty insane. But again, I think price point is going to be an interesting factor on these and how rare. Like, I haven't played around with the abyssal space itself as much, and I'm assuming they're coming from BPC drops of some kind.
Yes, I've done a lot of these, and it seems right now that the drop rate is definitely set up more just for Singularity itself, just so that way they can test the just test everything. But it's definitely going to depend on the drop rate afterwards, because the sites are actually, it's definitely a different kind of PvE. It's difficult. There is a high chance that people are going to die a lot when these come out, because it's not your normal, you're gonna shoot the red
linear.
crosses and you're gonna be safe. It's definitely a different style of PvE, and it's going to take people probably a few weeks to really figure out a groove. And but eventually, someone's going to figure out a fit, and it's going to be farmed just like anything else in Eve.
Probably passively.
So I imagine until
using
then.
a drone, but...
Yeah, I imagine until then, prices are going to be high. But once people really figure out the meta with running these just easily, quickly, and without much danger, you're going to see the price drop probably significantly. We're probably looking, maybe old pirate faction prices. So like bill for the battleship, or, 300-400 mil for the cruiser, 100 mil, whatever, for the frigate. Prices that used to be kind of a thing and are coming back for pirate battleships. And
if they fall
stuff.
at those price points, I think that would be pretty good for them. That would be a healthy point, keep them interesting enough, and actually be reasonably attainable for anybody interested in using them. I'm worried about them being extremely widespread. However, due to their fitting concerns and everything we all touched on earlier, I think you're going to see just a huge number of terrible fits. I mean, you already run into terrible fits out there on every faction ship under the sun, and these more so with their extreme limitations. Even on CC already, I'm seeing a lot of like cap regen ones. Like I just killed a Leshak a couple minutes ago on CC, and the thing was fit with 4 smart bombs, its gun, 3 batteries, a cap recharger, hull tanked, and I just don't understand what people are thinking sometimes when they come up with fits.
I mean, at least they're looking at the trait bonuses. Too many pilots don't actually look at trait bonuses before fitting, in my opinion. And interestingly enough, I don't think we've touched on it yet, but all 3 of these new ships have a 50% reduction in capacitor usage for smart bomb.
Yeah, I think one of the things they were potentially looking for with both the remote armor bonuses and the smart bomb bonuses were for people to potentially use them in PvE activities. Either that, or they threw that bonus in to really like help out the low-sec smart bombers. But
I don't think that would help out low-sec smart bombers as much, just because usually those are more hit and run.
Cycle.
Yeah, but yeah. I think potentially like a pipe bomber, like an old Rooks and Kings style pipe bombing, it could help because you need a lot of capacitor to keep those running, right?
It depends.
I can see that, but you're going to run into possibly tank problems with that as well. Just kind of depending on which one you're using. I imagine if you're talking about the battleship, whereas current you're really you're using rogues and whatnot with high, 8 high slots. These have currently got only 5, so really I don't think it's going to change that meta much, because you've definitely got better options.
Yeah, I think it's more geared towards PvE as far as that specific bonus goes.
I know in the Dead Space sites themselves, there are, I forget which one it is exactly, but one of the type of sites is filled with like rogue drone spawns, a lot of really small ships. If you get lucky enough that the site you're doing has one of those point defense beacons in it, you can game them on that quite easily. You lure them in close and tank the point defense and their damage, while the point defense helps you kill them. Some smart bombs on your cruiser would definitely go a long way in helping clear that site faster. Seems
Yeah,
like
I'm
they almost
actually
decided to do that. Like the smart bomb bonus kind of threw me for a loop. Like I don't understand why they did that. Other than the thing's got a bunch of utility highs, might as well give a bonus to anything you would potentially put in the utility high. So
one of the things that is kind of you just made me think of is we talked about farmability of these sites, and I think that 15-minute time window is both good and bad. Like it's good in that I don't think people will be able to mindlessly run them with like VNIs, because if you run them too slow, it just spits you out. You're just done with the site before you finish it, right? So you've got to have some modicum of uh, aggressiveness in order to finish out the entire site by the end of the timer. But on the opposite side, obviously, if you're going too fast and you overcommit, then hopefully you die. So, and if they are farmable to the point where people can run them in like really fast times, 10 minutes, and the rewards potentially at high levels are really good. You know, if the tier 5s are dropping the BPCs decently consistent, then that's going to be kind of concerning as well. So
Also, just a note, I don't know if you necessarily meant like actually popping them out, but if you run out of time, you get killed and you get potted.
I thought you
oh
just got
geez.
dropped back to the part where
Nope.
you started.
Nope, your ship gets exploded and you get potted. You don't even get kill mails. It
That's
just
hilarious.
straight kills you. I've
Wow.
I've hit
That's
I've hit
awesome.
that point a couple of times.
Wow, that's nuts. Because I guess that kind of makes
Yeah.
sense with the lore. Because when I was doing it, I just took in my PvP fit one to, I was doing up to level 3s with it. And when kiting the rats, like I didn't realize this at first until I ran into it, but there's like a red wall of death inside of those sites. Like if you kite too far away from the initial spawn, there's a red wall. You go past that red wall, you just start taking damage. There's nothing you can do
Yep.
about it.
And
You just start taking damage and more as you get further away.
yep. And I think it's actually more and more just the longer you're out there as well.
Yeah, it's I like that the way they design the sites. Honestly, I think it's fairly interesting PvE. I like that they're trying to actually make something like procedurally based, where the site is at least a little different every time you go in there. I like that they're going to be exposing more players to the effects of different attributes of your ship. There's not just it's not just in wormholes now. You're going to see, you know, modifications to tracking or EWAR or resistances or signature radius. It's now in these sites, and people potentially will actually start to learn more about the game through that.
I really like the boundary, simply because a lot of PvE pilots that I'll see, I'll watch their streams or whatever, but they have no real sense of where they are in space. And given an Eve, it's hard to think about unless you zoom out and really look at your position, because you'll just end up looking at the overview most of the time. Right? But this actually makes people look at where they are in space. And I think that's a really cool thing to involve in PvE, make people think about actual positioning and stuff.
One thing that's not currently on CC, but I do want to know the answer to, is the mechanics around the probable anomaly that will be created with these sites. That's been mentioned a couple times, but like I want to find out if you can light sinos on them, or you know what kind of mechanic is that going to involve, because that's really going to affect the danger level associated with these. While you're running the site, you presumably won't know what's going on outside, and if someone can just take a scepter and run around 10 systems constantly and wait until someone's running one of these and then just park that scepter on the outside, and as soon as they come out, presuming they finish, they just scram it and light a sino and drop carriers, like that's just gonna nullify any enjoyment from the process. So I think that will be a really important part of mechanics that we currently don't have on CC to play with and test. So
I think that they should look at that, but I really want them to make sure that you can't light these things. You can't go through like the generated little portal while on either a station, a Fortizar, Keepstar, or any structure, because that will just be broken.
Well.
People will just undock from their Keepstars and run them right on the undock. And nobody's gonna go and wait there for 15 minutes for the dude to get back. Yeah, I'm just waiting for this guy to come back through so we can kill him. Oh, we got PDF.
Yeah.
Currently, they said that the current mechanics on Singularity are not the final ones. They are definitely going to be kind of looking into that and making sure that something like that doesn't happen.
Good, I hope so, because it's ridiculous right now.
Well, I hope they make
I think it would be an obvious flaw on their part if they let you drop them outside of Keepstars, would just be silly.
I mean, I think that the event sites that have gone on, like Guardians Gala and those things, not being able to light sinos in those has brought me personally so much more content. And I think I would hope CCP has seen that in metrics as well. You know, getting people to move around space more and, you know, not being able to have reinforcements available at a beck and call. I really hope that when they make these probable anomalies, that they even consider the outside of the abyssal dead space pocket still dead space, where you can't light sinos and you can't warp, you know, 2-0 on your fleet member if they're at range. It will always hopefully just pull you to the specific area. So
yeah, I agree. They have to be careful with that. If they just, because you'll see defense fleets, right? If you're going to do GOTG or whoever and they're running those sites, there's going to be a sino sitting outside of that waiting almost every time.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the mechanics are in place. That's how factional warfare gates work, right? You warp to a factional warfare anomaly, it pulls you to 0. You can't light sinos. It doesn't matter if you're inside the warp acceleration gate or outside of it. There's, you know, still considered dead space. So
let's move on here a little bit and let's talk about the battleship, the Leshak. Now it's got some pretty interesting attributes. You can buffer tank it with a couple of plates for up to 139k. Plus, on top of that, you could either add a third damage mod or say like a reactive armor hardener or something. And you can actually do 1,600 damage at around 14 km once you've charged it up. And I think the charge takes like a minute. Is that right?
Yeah, it takes a minute. It takes 17 cycles, or the cruiser at least takes 17 cycles. But yeah, it takes about a minute.
I think the cycle should be about the same, and so you're just kind of going to be doing amount of cycles times the rate of fire. And I don't remember exactly what the amount of cycles for it is at the moment.
The cruiser is going to take more time to charge up because it doesn't have a rate of fire bonus. It has a tracking bonus instead. But the Leshak battleship has a 5% rate of fire bonus, so that should charge faster.
Yeah, I think so. I believe it is the ramp up is based purely off of the number of cycles.
Yeah,
it's number of cycles. So
the
battleship will quit up.
The entropic suppressors, the damage mod, increases rate of fire, so it also kind of depends on how many of those you've put on. But yeah, it's just based off of a certain amount increase per cycle.
For reference, I mean, Moo is sitting in a Leshak right now in front of me on CC. How much DPS, did you see how much DPS you were doing at max ramp to that Vindicator we just killed?
Let me go ahead and go back into my logs and look. Near the end there, I was doing about, 1,500 every 3 seconds. 1,500 damage every 3 seconds. When he was in hole, I was doing 3k.
Yeah. So if you're doing that every 3 seconds, so you're going to be around the same time as the cruiser. Cruiser cycle time with 2 suppressors is 3.5. So it takes me 17 cycles to get up to max damage. If you're at 3.5, it'll take you, I assume it's going to take you 17 cycles as well. And then that'll be about a minute if you're shooting every 3 seconds.
So in the current stream chat, someone says that it'll be 22 seconds for the frigate, 36 seconds for the cruiser, and 49 seconds for the battleship.
But I think that's pre skills applying and pre suppressors.
That might actually be post.
Really?
So those
think,
numbers seem that time seemed pretty low on that. It
extremely
could be
low.
posted.
yeah,
I sat
that
here and
seems low.
watched it ramp before it took a minute on the cruiser. But
Yeah, that might be
could be
with
wrong.
max skills.
One thing I think the Leshak in particular will have issues with that the other two might not have as much of an issue with will be jams. Because if it gets jammed, obviously the cycle stops, right? So you don't get that ramp up bonus anymore. And you only have 4 mid slots. So if you're concerned about jams, one of the things you would do is put a sensor booster and you could swap out to an ECM script when you see that jams are on the field. But having limited mid slots, I think will really kind of hamper that. And with the Leshak in particular, having so many low slots, you're really gearing that towards being your tank. You don't want to put in necessarily like a signal amplifier that will help against ECM because you don't want to give up on some of that tank, I think. So I think that's one of the issues that the Leshak might really stumble on is one Griffin shows up, jams it, and suddenly you go from 1600 DPS back to 800, not to mention your normal lock time and things like that. So could be very frustrating.
I could definitely see the Leshak not being a really popular solo ship to take against blobs just for that reason.
Yeah.
CCP found a way to make ECM even more effective in the meta. Weird.
It has pretty good drone bandwidth and bay, which is nice. You're not gonna only rely on the disintegrator for your damage output. It has 100 bandwidth and 250 M3 in the drone bay, so you could do a good mix of a variety of drone options.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of options you can roll with there. Earlier in the week, me and MJ were on the test server and we were playing around with it. And, they are surprisingly tanky buffer fit against carriers or even active rep fit if you're trying to kite.
Yeah. And I'm currently running that fit right now, the one you were trying to use against the fighters, because there was someone out here with fighters, but they left.
Yeah, if you double plate it, you can get a fair amount of HP on that, and then just use a reactive, and you can survive for a fair amount of time. Plus, if you have a Leshak buddy, you could potentially remote rep each other as well. I could definitely see these becoming like the meta thing you pull out of a wormhole or something when you've caught a carrier and you want to bring in some damage. Right?
Yeah, but their factor to consider is their mass. The mass on those battleships is huge.
Massive. Yep.
And consequently, their agility is awful. So a fit that I've been seen thrown around for like nano play in the battleship, it's surprisingly quick with like snakes and all your tricks and double nano. It was going about 1800 before heat, I believe, which is more than respectable. But its align time was like 30 seconds. And that was with nanos. It was just brutal to make the thing turn. So,
I mean, you still have to think about warp speed and general reasons why you don't take battleships. But if you have a wormhole that's within 2 jumps of a carrier that's caught, I could see these definitely coming into play.
yeah, I agree. And just to clear things up, I literally just tested it as I'm sitting in a VedMac right now with max skills. It took 1 minute and 10 seconds to get up to before heat. So if I had heated, it would have shaved it down to just about a minute. But yeah, it took a minute to get up to max charge.
What's your cruiser skill?
5. This is
I
not the
have
battleship. This is the cruiser. But yeah, I'm max skilled for it right now. And yeah.
I guess my question, I think we know Beatron, you're most excited for the VedMac. What about the rest of you guys? What do you think is going to be your favorite one to potentially fly?
It's really going to depend on price. I'm going to probably like the VedMac a little, but if these things are cheap enough, the Demovic, I could really see myself enjoying flying around in a group of like 5 to 10 of those with just remote rep fit in low sec, null sec, pretty much wherever, just like in a giant brawl fleet repping each other. I think that could be really fun.
Yeah. One of the things that I think we had talked about prior is the fact that Well, yes, they do have the bonus to, range and cap need for the armor reps. They don't actually have any bonus for rep amount. So you're not going to have, super tanky remote rep stuff unless you're doing like a big ball of people. You're going to have an unbonused rep practically for the rep amount in terms of, these ships with their utility heists.
I think on the Leshak, you can still get a pretty good amount of remote rep just off the base amount of a remote armor ripper large. I think you can get something like a 2k DPS rep output with if you can make 4 larges fit.
Yeah, and something else that might actually really help with that is these might lend towards the remote ANSILs a little bit more.
True.
And so we'll probably see those get used with this a lot more than normal.
Yeah, for quick burst tanks, helping people regain their buffer quickly, but not actually sustain infinite DPS.
The other thing too is, right, if you have that burst tank ability from a remote ANSIL rep, and you can keep someone alive for that 1 minute duration for their spool up, that may be the time that it takes to get enough DPS off the field that you no longer need to use that ANSIL, and you could reload it or something.
Absolutely,
so I think burst tanking in that regard is going to be, and even for like a solo Leshak, burst tanking just means that you can eventually get more total DPS output, even in a shorter fight.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Do you think that we'll see any Leshak nullsec doctrines or anything like
that? Not necessarily doctrines, but I know there are currently talks within my corp about possibly doing some roams with these ships as remote rep boats. So it's really all going to depend on price, but most of us, I think, can actually afford to just go and grab these whenever.
You'll likely
see us use it.
So I think it depends on the activity. I could see these being used for structure bashes in null pretty readily, just because of the damage ramp up and like hitting damage cap for smaller groups. I think at larger groups, like larger scale, they'll probably still favor Macarials, and also that kind of depends on Citadel mechanics. In their current iteration, Citadel mechanics kind of hinder you. You don't want to be at 0 on a Fortizar usually, or a Astra House. But I don't know. That's actually kind of interesting. I think that also depends a lot on price. If it's the same price as a Macarial, maybe. If it's the same price as a Nestor, probably not. And also how farmable, or like how many a big group can get at one time. I know for a while there was a group in NC that was looking at using Scorpion navies as like a doctrine. They wanted to play around with this was right at the beginning of Rorqual changes, where Logi Rorquals were crazy powerful, and they're still really powerful, but the indecision came down that it would be easier to field rattlesnakes because you just simply couldn't buy enough Scorpion Navy issues for it to be cost effective. It's like as soon as you bought like 10 or more off the market, you started jacking the price up by like 10 million per one that you ended up buying. So by the time you bought 30 Scorpion Navy issues, you'd actually jack the price up like 200 million ISK per Scorp Navy, and it just wasn't cost efficient. So it was like there was just no way for them to make mass doctrines. So
yeah, I think the nature of their damage profile is also going to scare away a lot of doctrines on them. The or the Leshak itself potentially can do a lot of damage early on, like with the ranged fit with max suppressors. I think you get about 800 DPS before you ramp up at all, which is very strong numbers for any battleship at 55 kilometers or so.
Yeah.
But just people wanting to see that increased DPS immediately, I think people are going to shy away from using them. I would like to see it though. I think it would be kind of cool. It would also potentially maybe push down on the capital meta if there was a huge fleet of 50 of the Leshaks and you drop carriers on them, and it takes a minute for everybody to ramp up to max damage. You're going to be melting through those carriers pretty damn quickly.
What do you think about a squad of these? So like, say you have your Mac fleet, and then you have 5 of these, and they could be used for a specific purpose-driven activity, like maybe intosising or something. Where
I think it's a great idea. That immediately gets me. I'm excited to hear that. I would love to see Doctor Large Fleet Warfare segment their fleets like that a little more.
Yeah, I think because these you could tank a bit harder because they have so many lows. So you could essentially make them less alphaable off the field while your general max trade. And so, like, say in a Mac versus Mac fight, if you have 10 of these and then the rest of your fleets is max, and they try to primary these, they're more likely to survive and get out their maximum DPS, and potentially that could be some interesting counterplay. Like, obviously, I don't have a lot of experience at 50v50 or 100v100 or 1000v1000 scale, but it could be kind of interesting to see.
Could also be cool because if they switched a target or were on a target that wasn't the primary, that would force the opposing Logi to make some serious decisions there, because you could just
and then the damage is going to ramp up too, so they can't necessarily say, "Oh, we're holding this guy."
You can absolutely just vomit the DPS there, right? So they have to decide between, like, what 5 of these things are going to do 8,000 DPS. There's 8,000 DPS going into this Mac, and then an entire Mac fleet is shooting at this Mac.
Something else.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Or even, as I've already mentioned before, a small anti-capital crew, right? Like if the enemy's bringing in 1 or 2 carriers for support, you could potentially drop in a couple of Leshaks, and they could be kept up by your cruiser Logi from range while they're face melting things with occult DPS.
Sure. Yeah, they do definitely. I think they'll scale in really well with the Guardian Logi core. I don't think you have to use like faxes. That'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see even the cruisers themselves. If you're running 3, I mean, you're going to be throwing your tank out the window a fair amount, but you could potentially resistance tank them. They're generally fast as is, so even with an afterburner, you can get close to 1,000 meters a second and mitigate a fair amount of carrier DPS. You bring in 3 of the cruisers with 3 suppressors each and some Logi to keep them up. You've got 3,000 DPS right there. Like you're carrier on carrier levels of DPS at that point. So for a small group escalating on somebody who's got a couple caps on grid, you could potentially get rid of them just with the cruisers alone. 1,000 DPS or cruiser.
Why even bring Logi when they can be the Logi?
I'm just really not hopeful for unbonus amounts on them. I mean, it's supplemental. It would be great maybe if you've got a single like regen Logi Legion or Logi Loki, and then you can use your reps on the Vedmax to help prop him up if he takes damage, and each other as he does the majority of the heavy lifting. I think they're just going to be really neat ships, and figuring out exactly what works best with them. It's going to be a really fun phase of experimentation when they first drop.
I'm pumped for the Leshak in wormholes. I think I'll probably be using that a fair amount to make money. So
I hear you, dude. I'm going to be not for making money, but I want to fight the blob dudes. We're going to hopefully get a couple of those Leshaks in the hole. Just waiting for a carrier to get too close to our hole.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, the other day you were talking about how Leshaks might actually change the wormhole meta a little bit. Do you want to fill us in on that?
Well, yeah. So like right now, currently, like C3s and under, you can do in cruiser, like T3 cruiser / battleship, like a rattlesnake. Mainly, the only reason you use a rattlesnake is just because it's really fast. Like a C3 and under, you can tank it very easily. Once you get to C4s, you can run C4s in a rattlesnake, and that's actually fairly common. But that's when you start looking at things like nesters. And then C5s, currently one of the best, like quote unquote, I say this in air quotes because capitals are always an option in C5s for running the sites. If you have a dread or something, they're going to be very efficient. But a lot of groups in particular, they will run nesters. They'll run like 2 nesters with a damnation, or maybe or more nesters. But The idea being that the nesters are so similar in their PvE fit to their PvP fit, and they have the utility of being able to refit from one another. So if they get jumped, they're very flexible. And then while doing the site, they can just do the site using remote reps. Whichever one gets primed is going to get neuted and what have you. As long as they just run their tank, the other nesters can run remote reps, and they're not being neuted, so they can run their remote reps just fine. And I think the Leshak in general, because of the disintegrator and the mechanics of it, when you're shooting a single target for a longer period of time, and that damage ramps up, that's going to be really beneficial to running sites at those higher levels like C5s very quickly. And also the remote rep capability is going to make them something very interesting for wormhole pilots to use and kind of replace the nester. And I think like from there, you can definitely fit them in ways that are very similar, where you can fit them to be more or less PvP fit while being remote rep for the site. And if you get jumped, you turn the disintegrator on, the Proteuses or the T3s that show up, and you can really, destroy some people and throw grapplers on, and you start tracking really well and pumping out 4,000 DPS or 8,000 DPS, depending on your numbers. And it can definitely change how people are not only PvEing in wormholes in that C5, C4 range, but also how they're killing each other in that wormhole range.
What do you think it'll do to the capital meta within the wormholes and eviction?
Yeah, so I was talking with I think, was it Razor that was on Mind Clash with us, but one of the guys was in Stranger Danger, and currently one of the biggest kind of like factors in how wormhole fights in C5 and C6 space play out is because of the mass of the hole. You're kind of limited in how many capitals you can bring. So the defending side, right, if you're jumping into someone's home hole and they have 10 capitals in their Fortizar, they could bring all 10. Well, because of the mass limitations, you can only max jump in a total of 3, plus a support fleet, before the hole gets to a point where it's unstable and you won't be able to get back. So oftentimes what that has come down to over the last couple months, and probably farther, but I've only been involved in the last couple months, is 2 dreads, a Force Auxiliary, you have 1 or 2 Balgorns, and your core. But if you are putting out or capable of using these Leshaks in place of Dreadnoughts, you could actually completely change how your meta is, because these are going to have far less mass than the Dreadnoughts, and that opens up your doors to bringing in 2 Force Auxiliaries, or bringing in a full like Leshak fleet plus Logi, or bringing in multiple, like far more Balgorns than you otherwise would. And so it would potentially diversify that wormhole fight meta, particularly around that 3 capital point that we currently have. And then if someone does bring 10 capitals in a what would have been one-sided fight, now you have far more people on grid and DPS output, and potentially you have 2 Force Auxiliaries to keep people up, or whatever the meta shakes out to be, and it could become a much more intense fight slash these people who thought they weren't risking much now could potentially lose all 10 capitals, and could really shake up the meta there. So
what do you think of I don't know if you touched on this, I accidentally dragged myself out of channel for a second there, but as a siege doctrine, like a few of those Leshaks is easily hitting the DPS cap on most citadels these days, and you could happily let them sit there and bash away on a citadel while the rest of the fight goes on, maintaining DPS cap, or doing significant damage.
When you talk about evictions, one of the big things from what I've been a part of, and like I've only been in a few, but I was involved in the POSP eviction, and you start looking at number of pilots that you can get in. right? How many pilots you can get into a hole is really important, and also utility, like pilot utility. So in particular, a ship like this that could be used to hit the DPS cap, but could also be used in some regard for rolling or a remote rep setup, could be really beneficial when you're talking about an eviction, and in particular, like on a larger scale, I think. Then you might still want to go with like a core Macario fleet for your offensive doctrine and hole control, but you might just use 5 of these like siege Leshaks to hit the DPS cap and be forcing the timer on a specific structure that you're fighting on. Or maybe while you're hitting the main Fortizar timer, 4 of these or 5 of these are off, reinforcing the other citadels, the other Athenors and dockable structures that are going to be used as reinforcing staging points within that wormhole. And so I think like that's really going to be a cool way for people to look at it in wormhole space. I think in particular, the Leshak is just going to open up a lot of doors in wormhole space for all activities, whether it's PvE, evictions, PvP, capitals, like whatever. I think the Leshak is going to be really cool there.
Yeah, I definitely see that as well. It's going to be one of those things that is going to be interesting to see just how people start to use it.
Yeah, I'm excited for that first couple days where you're going to see every crappy idea and the few hidden gems start to come out. I'm excited for my first Leshak escalation on a carrier. I'm so excited.
We're going to see crappy ideas years after they come out. Let's not kid ourselves.
But I'm just thinking, some of our ideas, some of the ideas people have that you think are good now, maybe you get onto TQ and you go, oh, wait a minute, this is actually crap. My anti-tackle Vedmak, I'd be like, oh, you know what, this is just nowhere near enough DPS to deal with that Jaguar before it gets on top of my friends. So this is not actually a good anti-tackle ship or whatever it is.
Also, they look really cool.
Oh my god, man. The animations. When you start shooting and like the little 3 prongs open up and the little black hole of hate gets really big. Oh, that's so cool.
Dude, I'm just waiting for if they come out with skins for them. Like how cool. Not only the ships look really awesome just as they are, but with skins as well, they're gonna be so intense.
I'm gonna say one thing that kind of ruined a couple of them for me because of Cyclo. Pod racers.
Look at the flip animation on the Vedmak.
Yeah, I'm about to show that on stream.
I like pod racers, so that's okay with me.
Now this is pod racing.
That's gonna be my new slogan.
They actually remind me of a different game, but I can't put a spot on it, where it was like a futuristic racetrack game where you'd like drive over bonuses to shoot at people, and but it's like from the 1990s. I'll Google Foo and see if I can
find. That's the game
find
where Captain Falcon comes from. Is that the one? Man, their animations are. Have you guys noticed too? Moo, I know I've seen you here shooting stuff with me while we're flying around, but the little balls, like the actual turrets themselves, as the damage approaches its cap, they get brighter and brighter and angrier looking. The little actual turrets. It's cool.
Yeah, they go from like a, what is it, light red to a very dark red as the damage ramps up.
Yeah, it's like almost yellow. Yeah, it's really cool. I think the art team just blew it out of the water with the designs on these things. They look insanely good.
Can't wait to see some of the skins these things will have as well.
Yeah.
I'm all right with the maroon red, man. I think they look just sexy as all hell.
I just want to see a police skin where the flashing lights come from the ball.
Yeah, blue and white lasers.
Dude, wait for a disco ball skin.
Oh, that would be cool.
Take my money now.
Yeah, I feel like we're giving CCP such great ideas.
Blood Ruin for the dev team in 2019.
Lol.
I'd vote for him.
No, fuck the CSM dev team.
Okay, so just so people get an understanding of what I was attempting to explain, the game that I was thinking about in my head is called Wipeout 1995. It was for the PlayStation, and I think later it was ported onto like PC and other platforms, but definitely look at an image of the ships that they're, or like in this it's like race cars that they're using in that, and compare it to the Vedmak, and they're almost identical. But yeah, anyway. Sorry.
Don't worry about
An
it.
aside.
But it kind of sounds like it's going to be closing time, so we're going to start to walk it out a little bit here. While we're walking it out, if you guys want to give a shout out to a pilot who's doing something you find interesting, feel free. We can start with Blood.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, like mine's okay, probably always easy. Finn True. He was my mentor for a long time in Eve. Good guy, great Twitch stream, amazing radio show, great music. Always love to hang out in his Twitch chat, even if I'm supposed to be asleep. So I'll shout it out to Finn True.
Right on. Beatron.
Bit of a weird one, just because I've been watching a lot of his older videos again recently, but one of my favorite PvPers of late is Stitch Caneland. Shout out to that guy and not giving a fuck about the meta and following his own path. That guy's really cool. I like talking with him in BSB, like seeing his videos. Hope to see more soon.
His videos are amazing. He really gets out there.
Party for life.
Dude, I just like how he takes, he follows something I always have tried to do at least a fair bit, and just go against the meta. Do something a little different, prove that the game is not as cut and dry as it seems. Torpedoes can work, heavy missiles do apply, and Artie does track.
All right, Nemj.
Oh God, I've been trying to think. I don't know. There's so many people that are doing a lot of things recently. There's a lot of people that have started up streaming, so maybe less just individual pilots, but definitely just like Streamfleet, the streamers themselves, bringing the content to Twitch, bringing people back to Eve, kind of getting the word out there.
Right. I'm personally just going to shout out a streamer I've been watching a few times. Never Convicted. He's a really entertaining dude. I think he's a retired police officer, and he's just really fun to watch. A good dude to keep up with. He's always getting into some trouble when he's streaming. He's a great dude. But I want to thank the guests for showing up and nerding with us for about almost an hour and a half. And hope everybody has an amazing rest of your week.